Welcome to Speak with Purpose, a celebration of thought and influence, where bold ideas ignite action. Join Christine Gagnon and the TEDxCatawba community in shaping the future.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Gagnon, founder and organizer of TEDxCatawba. We're here today to introduce one of our esteemed speakers for our 2025 event to be held here in Hickory, North Carolina on June 14th at the Drendel Auditorium. I'm joined today by John Lentini. He is president of BOLD Training Corp and a Crestcom international partner. Welcome, John. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me on a Saturday.
Thank you. My pleasure. Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Christine.
So I would love to start by telling our listeners a little bit more about you and share some excerpts from your bio to kick this off. Would that be okay?
Of course, go for it.
Awesome. You have led large finance and operations organizations for several global investment banks with roles based in US, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Your passion for leadership development began in 2014 while designing a coaching program for an NGO in South Africa. You're an MBA graduate from the University of Connecticut. You've received your undergraduate in finance from Fairfield University, and you now represent Crestcom across 5 US states. Well, John, congratulations on that footprint. That's pretty impressive.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate the intro.
So I would love to take a step back. So for the audience, John and I went to grad school together at the University of Connecticut, and there's many, many stories I'm sure that we could share back in the day. But I have one part here that I would love to refresh my memory on, and I'm sure it'd be a great intro for our audience. So you talk about 2014 and designing this coaching program for the NGO. Tell me more about that and how that potentially changed your trajectory, because when we first met, you were in the investment banking industry, and I remember how all that began. But clearly this was that turning point for you. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing is, as a participant in leadership development training programs throughout my career, I always kind of took it probably a little bit more seriously than my average peers and colleagues. I didn't just take it as time away from my day job. I kind of felt that the skills often really resonated with me and I wanted to do something with them. So I partook in this volunteer opportunity that you mentioned. It was called the Global Citizens Program. I was based with the late, great Credit Suisse in Europe. And nothing to do with my day job, mind you. I was running a large finance organization, but I was partnered with an amazing organization called Room to Read. If you don't know about them, I encourage you to look them up. They build schools for women in the developing world all around the globe. But I was given a mandate to develop a coaching and mentoring program for their countrywide leadership in South Africa back in 2014. But as I dug into it, I realized pretty quickly that coaching and mentoring wasn't really a 5-day mandate, probably a day and a half if I extended it. So ultimately, I developed a program that covered things like unconscious bias, emotional intelligence, social communication styles, personality styles, and really the whole range of leadership skills, which ironically isn't all that different from what I ended up doing today with Crestcom. So it was foreshadowing, even though I didn't know it at the time. But I ended up kind of doing this as a hobbyist. You know, I parachuted into Pretoria, South Africa after spending about 3 months developing a bespoke curriculum for the leadership. I worked with my learning and development department in London, as well as the leadership of the NGO in South Africa. Kind of flew into Pretoria, trained the leadership for 5 days, had a great experience, came back and adapted that curriculum, and I started training finance folks in Europe where I was. And I ended up doing this kind of on the sidelines of my banking career, which persisted for another 4 years or so. Still not knowing I would be doing this as a career. But 2018, I kind of packed it up, decided I was done with corporate life, banking life. I was back home in New York City. And really through serendipity, the opportunity to partner with Crestcom International, a global leadership development organization, landed in my lap. And given that background and, you know, the funny way that life works, this is...
It's so interesting. I think our lives overlapped, you know, on top of going to grad school together. But when we worked in Asia, when you went to London, I was in London at a different time and I worked in Johannesburg. So I think that coincidentally, South Africa also changed my career. It's interesting as well, because I'm sure there's many people listening that are like, oh, I'd love to make a career change. And, you know, you were there, you're doing coaching program that was voluntary, right? And so you didn't have to do that. But when you sort of take a step back and think about, was there a moment there where you were doing this coaching program and you were either questioning, you know, is this really what I should be doing? Or something that sort of popped to you to give you that start to where, maybe you started to develop that other train track?
Absolutely. The seeds were always planted. Even as a participant in these programs, as I mentioned, I'd see some kind of third-party vendors coming in at times who were previous executives at the banks I'd worked at. So I think I'd thought at times, wow, I could see myself doing that someday, transitioning and coming back to some of these organizations as an ex-executive and potentially leading from the outside. But I would say it's certainly something that I felt had a natural transition for me and my interests and skill sets. I think probably part of the dynamic is I'd always wanted to be a history teacher initially, and I somehow organically ended up getting into the banking industry. So in some ways it dovetailed in that way because I get to teach and train, but also leverage professional leadership experience. But really, having been in banking for over 20 years at that point, the finance operations, certainly the financial derivatives, which I mostly dealt with, became far less interesting to me than the people agenda. And I dealt with some pretty large, significant people agendas, and coaching and mentoring people, the reward of turning people's attitudes around, managing attrition from from poor rates of turnover to high rates of retention. Those sorts of things mattered a lot to me. And as the people agenda became front and center for me, I realized I'd probably rather focus on people rather than finance operations and the nuts and bolts of derivatives banking.
Well, I was thankful for what you did because there's many times where I called you like, "Hey, can you explain this to me? I have no idea what I'm doing. Please help." So I can appreciate how you got to where you are today. Tell me though a little bit about for those who don't know your path into banking. So before you made this pivot, how did you get into banking in the first place?
Well, it's interesting. As I mentioned, I entered school, Fairfield University, which had a strong liberal arts, core curriculum. I entered as a history major. I pivoted majors a few times within the liberal arts school, but I landed an internship in the World Trade Center the summer after my freshman year. And that just organically led me to switching my majors to first disciplines that straddle both liberal arts and the business school till ultimately I switched full throttle into the business school and I graduated ultimately as a finance major. Now, given there was such a large core curriculum, I had time to make up that decision. You might not have had that opportunity if you're in a more technical, full-on business school. But it was really the career opportunity and the track that I ended up on really through happenstance. The opportunity was passed to me through my network, and it became a career that I enjoyed. I certainly have no regrets that I was in that career for so long. It treated me very well, but it was certainly time to make a change. And I'm a big believer in change. I'm also a big believer that sometimes, your salary is the drug your employer pays you or gives you to make you give up on your dreams. And sometimes it can be very hard to pivot for a lot of people because you get very stable, secure, and comfortable. You may know that your soul is searching for something else. And sometimes you know that your current career may be sucking your soul dry in some respects, but it's hard to walk away from it because of the comfort and security and the stability. So I sort of consciously / subconsciously was looking for a way out. I took a couple of golden parachutes from a couple of different organizations I worked at, and I took a year off to figure out what was next. Took a deep breath in life and through a lot of soul searching and looking at different business opportunities. I think the one firm decision I had made is I wanted to do something for myself. I didn't quite know what that was, whether it meant starting by writing a book, buying an existing business, starting my own business, or getting involved with a franchise partnership as I ultimately did. But it takes some soul searching, but you have to kind of make that decision and try to distance yourself from the easy path, which is really just to go back to the corporate drug that keeps you from your passion.
I laugh because I think we went through a little bit of a journey at the same time. I remember spending some time with you a couple of years ago. I mean, if that even maybe 2 years ago, and I was thinking through the same thing. I agree in that leap for something that might be calling you a little louder is a bit scary, to take that risk and jump and sort of not know what's out there. So, kudos to you and perhaps kudos to me for doing that. Now, you get your start in banking, and I'm assuming it's everything that you expect. You're probably working a lot of hours. And so when did the MBA program come into the mix? Because that's when we met. So when was that? We were in school, what, 2004?
I think, yeah, I started the program at University of Connecticut 2004, finished in 2007. So,
Oh, you finished before me.
Yeah, maybe a little bit before you. Yeah, summer, just I think May or June of 2007, which was 10 years after I finished my undergrad. So it was a decent time after I graduated, which I think is valuable. Some people are doing their MBAs right after they graduate, consecutively. Obviously, there's some value there, but I think there's a lot of value in having real world experience to apply to your MBA journey.
I
And
agree.
I certainly had plenty of that by the time I started.
So you finished in 2007 and you were in the investment banking world. So that was 7 years from then into your NGO experience in South Africa. Very, very interesting. So then you graduate MBA school. And for me, when I graduated MBA school, I thought that it would give me more answers on what I wanted to do. And when I got out, I was actually like, wait, I'm more confused than when I started. So I started undergrad as an finance major. I switched to accounting. I came out, I went to PwC, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do accounting. So I was like, okay, I'll go and I'll do my MBA, and then that will help me solve it all. And I did it. And I sort of came out and said, well, now I really don't know what I want to do. Is it law school? Is it something else? Did you have that experience? And how did you feel when you graduated?
That's an interesting perspective because I was somewhat unique from a lot of the classmates that I dealt with at UConn from memory, because many did join the MBA looking to find a new career path, and that's why they were there. That
I
wasn't at
thought you
all.
were going to say we were more fun. That's not why we're
Well,
different.
there's that too. Social element of an MBA is
Just
certainly one of
checking.
the values that attracted me to an MBA versus a CFA, for example. The social community aspect,
Oh,
and
yes.
look at us here today, for example. That
Hmm.
certainly was a big motivator. But I wasn't doing my MBA for a career pivot. I was quite comfortable and happy with my current career trajectory, and I was really looking for it to lend greater credibility and gravitas to my trajectory within the career that I was already in, and it did that. It helped me as more senior executive opportunities came along. The fact that I was a qualified MBA candidate certainly added some of that credibility that I was looking for. But to be perfectly frank with you, the MBA curriculum as a finance undergrad, the greatest takeaways weren't so much the academic takeaways because I had already studied finance as an undergrad. So we were looking at it from different perspectives, and I took a lot away in terms of that. But the two primary things that I really took away personally from my MBA journey were largely around the travel. And as you know, I did a lot of travel during the MBA program. That was one of the great benefits of the UConn program. We met, of course, in France in the capstone,
Yes.
but I traveled to many different places in Asia and Latin America and Europe throughout my MBA, which mirrored my banking career. So travel has always been a bug for me. But really, one thing that I always say is public speaking, which is interesting given the dynamic of the
Hmm.
TEDx. I had to do a lot of public speaking in my career before that, but I was just like everyone else. I had to envision the crowd naked. I had that anxiety of speaking in front of large crowds, and I addressed crowds of hundreds of people early in my career, but I wasn't particularly good at it. I wasn't particularly confident at it. But throughout the MBA program, on a weekly basis, I had to get up impromptu and present to folks in ways that I really hadn't throughout my life and career. And I think my greatest takeaway from that MBA journey at UConn is I am perfectly comfortable speaking in front of any audience today, no matter how large, how senior, how exalted. And I really credit the MBA journey primarily for feeling, at ease in front of a large audience and speaking my mind.
Wow, it took me a lot longer to get there. And in fact, now people are like, wait, do you want to do a TEDx talk? I'm like, absolutely not. No, thank you. I am much better at finding speakers to do the talks. Thank you very much. I have to say, I second your feedback though on the travel. That was amazing. I think we probably have a lot of folks in academia listening, including grad students and undergrad students. So I just want to share the travel. So I went to France, I went to Mexico. I went to China and Brazil. So, what trips did you do in your MBA?
I went to China twice, once to Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou, once back to Hong Kong and Beijing. I went to Chile and Argentina. I went to Budapest and Prague, and of course to Capstone in France.
Oh man, what's your favorite?
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to say. I enjoyed them all.
You have to say France because that's where we met. I'm just kidding.
Well, France was a
No.
unique opportunity because obviously we were partnering with EM Lyon, which was an interesting. That was a bit different. That wasn't just MBA travel. That was more of a capstone curriculum based at a foreign institution, which isn't how the other trips were structured. Obviously, Asia had a big impact, I would say, because I did end up relocating and living in Hong Kong and Singapore for 3.5 years.
Right.
So that probably had the most straight line impact on my life and career trajectory from there. But I love the whole world. I do consider myself a global citizen, which is why the Global Citizens Program that got me involved in leadership development was aptly named for me.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I have to say the same for myself. I'm hoping to get on the road more this year. So, okay, we pivot a little bit into today, where you are with BOLD Training Corp and Crestcom. Is there anything that you miss about investment banking in your old career, your old world, or are you like, nope, I found my place. I have no regrets. Not that they'd be regrets, but anything you miss?
I don't know if this is a bad answer, but no, not for a moment. I've never looked back.
Wow. All right, that's impressive.
And it's interesting because when I started my business, I started it in 2019, and I really just started traction February of 2020. And second week of March of 2020, my business was dead in the water for essentially a year and a half to 2 years. I stayed active and I continued to build it and grow the brand and do a lot of pro bono work to build my name and build relationships, which yielded benefit over time. But it was a challenging period. I fortunately had the resources to see my way through it. A lot of people wouldn't have, and a lot of people didn't. But even during those dark days where I might have said, oh, I should have stayed in the secure banking, environment where I had a steady paycheck while I'm trying to find my way, I still never regretted it. I'm far better off for having been through that. My business is far more resilient and dynamic as a result of it. So, it's a bit of a foreshadow without it meaning it to be for my TED Talk, but that's largely what, I'd like to convey to the audience in many respects, that, adversity is part of life, failure is part of life. You need to embrace those lessons,
I
expect,
agree.
and it's only through the failure you're going to get to success. And you're not going to find anybody you admire in any walk of life, any industry that you care about, that hasn't struggled. And it's the struggles that make people admirable. So if it was all smooth sailing, my business would not be what it is today. There's no doubt about it. So you have to go through the pain in order to get to the pleasure, right? So I'm very grateful for it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
I 100% agree. And I actually remember those days because I just moved back from London to the US, and we were having this conversation because I was in process of taking the role at the private equity firm. So that seems like yesterday. It's surprising how time flies. So you had talked about your sort of two favorite things about the MBA program, your travel and the public speaking. So let's just apply that same mechanics to today. What are maybe your two favorite things about what you do that you could share with the audience? Because I'm sure everyone's maybe thinking, I want to make a leap. How do I do this? What does it feel like? So you are a business owner. You've started this firm. You're an entrepreneur. You are very successful. What are two things you think you would say really get you up in the morning?
Well, that's also a very interesting question because I got into this business, as many do, for the privilege and reward of impacting people, for seeing those aha moments, for turning, swaying people's hearts and minds. And that still is absolutely something that I get a thrill out of. It's why I got into this business. I was reluctant to get into this or any business because I'd never really been in sales. I wasn't sure I wanted to be in sales. I thought I might have some capabilities in that space, but I didn't really have an appetite for it per se. But I kind of quickly came to the conclusion, if you want to be in a business of any sort, you have to be selling something at least to start. I love when people say they don't want to buy a business because it's a sales-based business. I was like, well, tell me a business on earth that isn't a sales-based business, right? So I had to get my head around the sales process. And we're largely an outbound sales process, which is more challenging. But what I'll say is I was reluctant to get into it because of the sales component. And there's parts of the sales component I still don't enjoy. Parts of it are still my least favorite part of the job. And we all have to have a least favorite part of a job. We have to have the discipline to power through that. I've had the privilege of outsourcing some of the parts that I found least,
Hmm. Hmm.
attractive to me, but I do still own some of them because no one will ultimately sell your business as well as you will. But the interesting component is the heart and soul of my actual sales process, where the sales are made, have literally become my favorite things to do in my business. And I almost didn't get into this business because of that. And if I could focus all of my energy on anything, it would be, sort of the back end of how I sell, because that's really where I have the huge aha moments where I can really turn people's minds, especially those skeptics who didn't think they wanted what I had to offer. Because I don't see myself as selling something. I see myself as looking for the opportunity to get in front of people, to let them understand the value that I can offer them. And, when I have that opportunity, it typically is effective. The challenge is to get that opportunity. So interestingly enough, the part that I dreaded the most has largely become my favorite part. And the part that I was looking forward to still is something I rather enjoy, but it's become more of the day job. Having to prepare
Hmm.
for running classroom-based training and running coaching sessions with clients, that's more of the routine, whereas it's far more dynamic, the sales process, to engage with new clients and prospects.
I love what you said because when I thought about changing careers, there were times where certain paths would be more sales focused. So, progressing in the big four firms like a PwC or an EY, there are sales targets. And I always said to myself, I'm not a salesperson. I don't like sales. I couldn't sell something if it was free. And now that I am actually in the seat of an entrepreneur and having to sell, you are right. It doesn't feel like selling. And my client once gave me a compliment like, wow, you're really good at this. Like, you're really good at kind of selling XYZ. And I said, it doesn't feel like selling. It just feels like, really talking about my clients, putting them forward and having a good, hearty discussion. It feels like conversation. It doesn't feel like sales. So I love what you said because I think that trips up a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that perspective. I also just took a little note here. It's funny because you said that you wanted to become a history teacher, and then you fast forward to today and you explain kind of you're back in the classroom and you are teaching. So in a way, you're full circle to what your initial dreams were, albeit that the subject matter is slightly different. Do
That's,
you feel that way?
oh, absolutely. And I often feel like we are who we were in high school. A lot of the passions I had then, I've revisited, whether it be martial arts or scuba diving, a lot of things that I grew up loving that I sometimes left behind, I've revisited. And similarly with the history professor, I'd always had a passion for teaching, always had a passion for sort of being in front of the classroom, I think. And I was able to use the 20 plus years of corporate leadership experience that I had to, transition into doing exactly that. So, life unfolds naturally if you let it.
I agree. Okay, so let's get to our TEDx talk, which you and I are so excited about. So I want to know what inspired you to get on the TEDx stage and why now, other than I asked you?
Well, I mean, obviously, a lot of the stuff I've already shared, I think, makes that somewhat obvious. But I, I do love inspiring, and a lot of what I think anyone who steps onto the TEDx stage hopes to inspire. But ironically, I think a lot of what I hope to convey to people is that inspiration is not enough because inspiration is fleeting. It's discipline that will matter. You won't be inspired every day. If you want to go to the gym and stay in shape, you're not going to be inspired every morning to do it. It's only through discipline that you're going to do the work.
Oh,
You're not going to
I
see this.
felt that this morning, like, oh God, I want to
No, you
take
have
like
our
a week
moment.
off.
That's okay. That's okay. You can forgive yourself and give yourself some grace. But you're not going to see progress every day when you go to the gym, right? You go to the gym
That
today,
is
tomorrow, you're not
true.
going to see results. But if you do it steadily with discipline, consistency, you'll see results. And it's not inspiration that gets you there, it's discipline. So as much as I do hope to inspire, as anyone does, the inspiration may not last past, the 15 minutes or so that they're sitting in front of me. But I hope that they walk away inspired to apply discipline to their lives, as well as my mindset and resilience, which are really the three kind of dials for success that I will be speaking to.
Great, great. Thank you. So I don't want to give away too much because there's a lot about your background that's very interesting that will feed into the talk. And we will obviously learn more about that as you take the stage in June. But if there is, maybe one other key message that you hope the audience walks away with after your TED talk is or TEDx talk, is there anything else that you'd want to add? I agree with you on the inspiration angle, and I love the talk about your dials. We talked about that offline. So we'll share that with the audience. But anything else you want to add on what you hope people take away from either your talk or the day?
Well, obviously, I think what you're alluding to is I'll share some personal experiences, which are kind of examples that support the model that I plan to introduce to hope to inspire. But that's my story. Everyone has their own. My story is mine, and I'm using it as a vehicle to tell a story. Right. I encourage everybody to think of what their story is. Everybody has their own. Everybody has their own life experience, and think about what your trajectory of life has looked like. Think about how that will inspire you to apply the model that I'll be talking about. My story is not your story, and it doesn't need to be. And the examples I give may resonate because you have personal experiences or personal hobbies and passions that maybe are similar or relate to mine. But even if they're completely unrelated, dig deep into your own life's history and figure out what it is that, you know, informs your story, informs what happens next, and lets your life unfold naturally the way that mine has.
I love that. And I think one of the questions I sometimes ask is, what advice would you give for people that want to do a TEDx talk? But I think that was perfect advice, right? It's all about storytelling and what's your personal story. So that speaks to me. Well, John, you're a great friend. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to see you in June and have you on the stage. So we'll see you in a couple months.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. Thanks for seeing me.
To all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Tune in next week for another episode of Speak with Purpose to get insights into our speakers, sponsors, and partners for TEDxCatawba. You can also learn more about our independently organized TEDx event and purchase your tickets on our website, TEDxCatawba.com. We're also on social media. It's TEDxCatawba. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. Thank you so much and see you next week.